In Mark 15 verse 19 we read, "And they smote him on the head with a reed, and did spit upon him, and bowing their knees worshipped him." The people bowed the knee and worshipped. Of course, they did so mockingly. They were mocking his claim to be King of the Jews. Their behaviour was also reminiscent of the way the idol worshippers bowed to their idols. In fact, there are several specific similarities between the way the Jews and Romans behaved towards Christ and the way people behaved towards idols in Old Testament times. In this video we will consider a passage in Jeremiah 10 which speaks of idols, and we will identify several ironic links between this passage and the crucifixion. Jeremiah wrote during the invasions of Judah by the Babylonians. Idolatry was already rampant in the land. Those being taken into captivity into Babylon would be further surrounded by idolatry. The victory of the Babylonians seemingly vindicating a belief in their gods, such as Bel and Nebo. Against this background, Jeremiah in chapter 10 warns against the futility of idolatry. In verses 3 to 5 he said, "For the customs of the people are vain, for one cutteth a tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workman with the axe. They deck it with silver and with gold, they fasten it with nails and with hammers, that it move not. They are upright as the palm tree, but speak not. They must needs be born, because they cannot go. Be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, neither also is it in them to do good." The idol was made from a tree, could not speak, could not move, and it could do no evil. The stake upon which Christ was crucified is referred to as a tree by Peter in Acts 5. And just as an idol had to be born, so Simon of Cyrene had to bear the stake. With regard to Christ himself, he was nailed to the tree just as parts of an idol were fastened with nails. And just as an idol cannot speak, so Christ chose to answer nothing. And just as an idol can do no evil, so Christ had done no evil. In verses 8 and 9, Jeremiah wrote, "But they are altogether brutish and foolish. The stock is a doctrine of vanities. Silver spread into plates is brought from Tarshish, and gold from Uphaz. The work of the workman, and of the hands of the founder. Blue and purple is their clothing. They are all the work of cunning men." Here, the Hebrew for stock is the same word as is translated tree earlier in the chapter. Silver was used in the making of idols, and of course, silver played a central role in the betrayal of Christ. Just as the idols were clothed in purple garments, so Christ was clothed in purple. In verses 14 and 15, Jeremiah says, "Every man is brutish in his knowledge, every founder is confounded by the graven image. For his molten image is falsehood, and there is no breath in them. They are vanity, and the work of errors. In the time of their visitation they shall perish." Ironically, once Christ had died, and he had given up the spirit, he was like the idols, for they have no breath. During his trial and crucifixion, Christ had behaved as a lamb. As Isaiah wrote in chapter 53, "He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before his shearers is dumb, so he openeth not his mouth." Christ could have called on legions of angels to help him, but he chose to passively submit. He allowed himself to be treated like an idol, which cannot speak or do anything. Of course, Christ was not an idol, or seeking to portray himself as an idol, but his submission allowed the wickedness of the people to be manifest, a wickedness which emulated the idolatry of the Jews before their exile and the idolatry of the pagan Romans in the first century. In Jeremiah 10, the sections which speak about idols are interspersed with verses which speak about the God of Israel. These passages too are echoed in the trial and crucifixion of Christ. In verse 7, God is addressed as King of Nations, and Christ too was addressed as King. The prophet declared that Yahweh is the true God, and the centurion said of Christ, "Truly, this was the Son of God." In contrast to the idols, Jeremiah says that God is the living God, and this phrase was used by the high priest during the trial in Matthew 26 verse 63. In verse 12, Jeremiah speaks of the power of God and the heavens. And in the next verse in Matthew 26, Christ said, "Hereafter shall ye see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven." In the centuries after Christ, as Christianity went astray from the teaching of Christ and the apostles, the cross, even though the original may simply have been a stake, became an object of adoration. The cross is now treated in many ways like an idol, finely crafted, borne along in procession and venerated. As the links between Jeremiah 10 and the crucifixion have shown, those who behave in this way towards the cross are, perhaps unwittingly, aligning themselves with those who tried and crucified Christ. Hezekiah showed the right attitude. The brazen serpent had been made by Moses that those who looked upon it might be healed from the bite of the fiery serpents. In John chapter 3, Christ likened his forthcoming crucifixion to the serpent being lifted up on the pole. But by the time of Hezekiah, the serpent had become an object of adoration and veneration. So Hezekiah destroyed it. He called it Nehushtan, which means a thing of brass. There was no reason for preserving the serpent, no reason for preserving relics of the serpent, and certainly no reason for pretending later that a piece of brass had originally been part of the serpent. In Jeremiah 10 verse 15, Jeremiah said of the idols, "They are vanity, and the work of errors. In the time of their visitation they shall perish." The idols of Judah perished when the Babylonians invaded the land, and the Babylonian gods would later perish when Babylon was overthrown by the Medo-Persians. When Christ came to his people, it was their time of visitation, but they would be found wanting, for they treated the Son of God with disdain, as though he was a dumb idol. And so they brought upon themselves the destruction of AD 70. As Christ said of Jerusalem, "And shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee, and they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation." But in the end, unlike the idols which perish, Israel will be saved, as Jeremiah goes on to say in chapter 10, "They are vanity and the work of errors. In the time of their visitation they shall perish." The portion of Jacob is not like them, for he is the former of all things, and Israel is the rod of his inheritance. Yahweh of hosts is his name.